So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a senior in college. So I decided I don't know what I want to do. So the next logical step is to go to grad school because that will teach me what I want to do. No, that's
Hey, Olivia. Thank you so much for joining me today. You were my student and graduated in 2016. So you've been out of the college classroom for about 8 years now, and have found a pretty impressive role as an installation analyst with a defense contracting company. And so I know there's a lot of people interested in military careers, but also that whole space of defense contracting as well. So excited to learn more about that. I guess let's kick off by telling me a little bit about like what your role is and what sort of a day-to-day installation analyst does.
yeah, awesome. Good question. So just in general, like the whole point of any and everyone in the defense space, right, is to support the Department of Defense in whatever facet that may be. So what I do specifically is I help support the planning stages of specific projects. So if you look at an entire project, I mean, we're talking a very long time,
Like a couple
probably.
year project or
No, like we're the better part of a decade.
oh wow.
Yeah. So there's not one person overseeing that entire thing. Well, there is, but that's not most people. So you work on a specific portion, you
Okay.
move it down the line, and then the next project comes along and you do a very similar thing for the next project.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your firm I believe specializes in like software and data and so we're
Um,
projects, we're not talking about building an aircraft carrier per se, right? It's
yes. So focused more on the computer
okay,
pieces.
very cool. Is it a competitive space? Are there like different firms, fighting for contracts or trying to get a bid, or how does that work a little bit?
So it is a competitive space, but nine times out of ten, that all happens in the background. So no one like I'm never going to be really involved in that. That kind of happens, and then either the company you're working with stays or they don't. And then there's a turnaround period, and typically you would either try to stay with that company in a different role,
Okay.
which I mean that could be like you might have to move, or you're going to be doing something completely different. Or on the reverse side, it could be that they don't want you. It could be that they like just don't have as many jobs now and they have too
Okay.
many people. So then you would try to find a job elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think for context, because when you're working with government contracts, these are very big number contracts that so if the project either ends or they
Mhm.
don't get a contract they're expecting, then that's enough to almost like reorganize the company a bit, right?
It could be, yeah.
Because you're looking at very major projects in that regard.
But that sounds scary. I haven't, so I've never had to experience something like that. Most people that I've worked with haven't had to experience anything like that. And if and when there was turnover, the transition process wasn't bad. It was pretty streamlined.
Okay.
Because like you have skills, people are going to want them. The same people might not have use for you, but someone else can be like, "Hey, remember that thing you did? Can you do it over here?" So,
Excellent. When you first graduated,
mm,
I assume you weren't like, oh, someday I'm
no
gonna work
idea.
for a defense contractor. So how, yeah, tell me a little bit about the process of like, you're a senior in college and now fast forward 8 years later, and you have this very, unique career. How did you sort of find your professional career path?
Mm. So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a senior in college. So I decided I don't know what I want to do. So the next logical step is to go to grad school because that will teach me what I want to do. No, that's
A common mistake, right? Grad
yeah,
school is good for people who know why they want grad school.
yes,
A lot of students use grad school to keep thinking, right?
yeah. It like I was able to go on essentially a scholarship. I got a TA position, so it didn't really cost me anything, but it didn't really like it helped me refine some skills that I have found useful later on, but it wasn't immediately helpful after graduating grad school.
Okay.
But it did teach me what I did not want. So,
Okay. And
so yeah,
there's an MA in communication, I believe, right?
yes, yeah.
And you
So
did
I was
sociology.
a sociology. Sorry, go ahead.
Just what you said. You were a sociology undergrad.
Yeah, and then I got my a master's in communication focused more specifically on organizational communication and how to improve workplace efficiency, because that's just something that I always found interesting. While I was getting my master's, I was also a TA at SDSU for the communication program, and I was working full time too in retail. So I was selling lotion 35, 40 hours a week.
Okay.
And after that, I applied to about 100 different places in
Really?
about in about a 2 or 3 month span
Oh, wow.
before and after graduating from grad school while I was like writing my master's thesis and everything. I only got about 10 to 12 interviews.
Okay.
And it was an interesting, like I was overqualified and underqualified at the same time. I had more degrees than the average person, but I didn't have enough work experience, which
Okay.
some of it just isn't fair in general because like they want you to have 7 years of experience and you're like, okay, well, like I'm 22, that's not happening.
Right, right.
And then I took the first job that was willing to hire me that I found interesting.
Okay.
So I was in billboard sales for a year,
Oh, okay.
which, or billboard advertising sales for a year, which was super fun and interesting, but it didn't meet the needs that I was looking for. And then my boyfriend had a friend who had a similar like job in the defense space, and he said, "Hey, this is interesting." And I thought that was really interesting. So I just found the name of the company and I emailed the owner of the company
Hmm.
and I was like, "Hey, I'm interested." And then I didn't get a response. So a couple weeks later, I very tastefully drafted another, "Hey, hello. I sent you an email.
Right.
Do you want to hire me?" Much more tasteful than that, but that was essentially
And
the
and that worked.
goal.
And I imagine in that email you mentioned the person that already worked there.
Yes, yes. I name dropped, but I got permission from the person before I name dropped to name drop.
Wow. I mean, so, and I've heard these kind of stories of people applying, online applications, 100 of them, and, very small
Mhm.
numbers. And some of it depends on, well, sure, features of the individual, but also like the current job market at any given time. If you're graduating and it's, the labor market's tighter, then, people are sometimes struggling to find those. But then the juxtaposition, I guess, between that approach and then the kind of using somebody in your network, taking initiative, really is what I hear in that. That's fascinating. And so, did you know they had an opening, or you were?
No. So the thing about this interesting is that this industry is they're always open. Like they're always grabbing resumes. They
Okay.
might not have anything, they might not have anything for a long time, or they might have a lot of things. It's a little tougher of a sale to go from sociology and communication to like contracting, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not quite there, but they were gracious enough. And I think I was stick to itiveness enough that they were like, okay, so they wanted to meet me. And I came in and it went well. I was offered a job a couple weeks after the fact, but I found out a couple months after I started and it was working out. The owner pulled me aside and said that they had offered like a dozen qualified applications to the person that was hiring me. So the way it worked out was I guess there were about a dozen or so qualified applications, and then there was mine. And I stuck out, I guess, in a good way. The people that they had worked with in the past that had the more traditional resume wasn't working out, so they decided to at least grant me an interview to see what I had to say, and it worked out.
Wow. Okay. What about, so how was the interviewing process then? Did you prepare or practice, or how did you decide how to go into that?
I tried to prepare, but I was also nervous, and there are different ways of preparing an interview for probably as many different people, right, as there are ways. But I've found out that the more prepared I tried to be, the worse I tended to do in the interviews.
Oh, okay.
And like the jobs where I was like unsure or like not super interested, I ended up for some reason excelling in. So I don't know if it was I would psych myself out, and then if I just slid in and didn't prepare, I was fine. Like asking questions, but also just being straightforward. Like they're gonna like you or they're not gonna like you, and you want to test them out too, because
Right.
who you work for it matters.
Yeah, you're interviewing them too,
Yeah,
right? So did you go in with like a set of questions? I assume you Googled the company and learned a little bit about it before you
yeah.
go in, and
I did some Googling, but Google doesn't really, I mean, just in general, right? Like even not in this industry, I found that a lot of like the job descriptions don't actually match the job.
okay,
Like I was trying to be a client success manager at one company, and that ended up being the person that stands outside of trolley station asking people if they want to sign up for
Okay.
like a position, right? Like not quite what I had in mind. And in this particular industry, you're limited to like what you can actually, right? It's not publicly known.
Okay, sure.
I don't
There's
know if that helped.
sensitive information when you're working in defense and things like that. That
Yeah.
makes sense. You said that you had your first sort of what you would call career job after selling lotion. Was it the billboard sales? And you did that for like a year, I think you said.
Mhm.
So how did you decide like, okay, it's time to move on versus like trying to climb the ladder at that company or something like that?
Mhm. So I knew going into it that that wasn't something that I was going to do forever. I kind of started it. I took the job knowing it was probably going to be a 1 year job. And I was there for 13 months, so that was about accurate. But I knew that stability is very important to me. It just kind of always has been. And sales is not the best industry for someone who wants stability because you can make, like, I know people who have made a ridiculous amount of money in 1 month, but then they don't get paid for 7.
Oh,
Like,
because
that's a problem.
commission based role.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, and I knew it wasn't forever, but I've for some reason have always had a fascination with billboards. I found them interesting. I've had probably a dozen or so conversations about them, and the boss seemed like her and I got along really well, and I thought it was a good enough opportunity. And they were the first people who were willing to offer me a job that I was willing to accept, even if temporarily.
Right. It makes sense. You sometimes are open-minded about that first opportunity, and never inevitably you learn things about yourself and get some professional development, and then that becomes like a stepping stone, I suppose. What was sales experience useful in any of the positions that followed?
Yeah, so I had a lot of sales experience before. So I will say, in going back just a little bit, in the dozen or so interviews that I had after graduating from grad school, I was at like they would look at your resume and be like, "Oh, you went to Point Loma. That's cool." Or my neighbor's third cousin twice removed went there. But like that was it. And then one person once brought up like that I was in communication, but no other time were my degrees ever like referenced. But they always asked about my debate experience and they always asked about my sales experience.
Okay. Well, and I
Like
should so you were on the debate team in undergrad and even got I believe like part of your grad school covered because of that debate team experience. Was it related?
in a roundabout way, but essentially yes.
Okay. So that the skills of public speaking, whether it was in a debate team or sales experience directly, was
Mhm.
something very interesting to a lot of the employers you were interviewing with.
Yes, just being able to talk, I guess, to almost anyone about almost anything.
Yeah.
And I think that it probably also symbolized not bravery, it's not bravery, but like I'm gonna work hard and I'm not gonna back down from a challenge.
Okay. Right. A
That's what
certain
I,
tenacity or go get 'emness that comes with being on a debate team, especially, but sales as well. So I think what something I'm hearing in this is, a lot of students maybe struggle or agonize over whether they picked the right major. And I think you're saying major may not matter as much as these sort of like transferable skills that employers are.
exactly. So like I mean we all know the statistic, right? Like 80 or something percent of people who graduate 5 years later are in a job that have nothing to do with their
Right.
experience, right? Yeah, that's entirely true. And part of it is like when you're, 18, 22, you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life. But I also still don't know what I want to do,
Right.
right? So it's all about doing what feels right, like do things that you find interesting,
Mhm.
and then just take opportunities. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But then you always try to pivot.
Yeah, no, you mentioned something really important there. I think, it's been a long time since people would get a job and stay with it for 30 years. And, that's where you retire. Many of us will change careers and roles like several times across our life. And so sort of the idea of like really long-term vision may not be as helpful as sort of what I'm hearing from you is that sort of knowing what's interesting to you. And I assume developing certain skill sets and then kind of just being opportunistic to a degree. I mean, would you add anything to, the student who thinks, oh, I need to have it all figured out, or I don't know what my passion is, my long-term passion, and so I don't know what to pursue. Like,
I mean, I think the people that, I mean, even if you're in your like 30s or 40s and you know what your like lifelong passion is, that's great and you're lucky. And I also think that there's this idea of like, well, my like full-time career has to be my passion.
Mm,
I don't particularly, I mean, if you can make a lot of money or even a decent amount of money pursuing your passion, that's great. But like my one of my passions is writing, and I'm like writing a teen dystopian novel that is the best novel I've ever written. It's probably not going to be a New York Times bestseller, right? But it might be. But I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. I'm doing something that I do a decent job at now that brings me joy, right?
yeah.
It's like I'm not going to go there on a Saturday and hang out. Absolutely not. But I don't mind being there 40 hours a week.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is sometimes some folks I think will think like your passion has to be your vocation, and there's a lot of ways you can get meaning from your work without it being. In some cases, I guess if you say you're working for a nonprofit or social work or something like that, and so the work itself or the mission of the organization is where you get your meaning. But I think for other people, it's it supports a lifestyle or an alternative passion outside of work, or you're able to provide for your kids or something like that. And so people get meaning from their work in a lot of ways beyond just necessarily being like this job title is what I'm
Yeah.
passionate about. So I hear you. And there's definitely something to stability, a good paycheck rolling in that you can depend on. There's plenty of people who try to turn their passion into their full-time job, and it ends up ruining their passion for them, I think.
Exactly. I was gonna say that too. Like I love baking, but I will only bake like a couple times a month because it takes forever.
Mhm.
And that's like I once made I tried to make Christmas cookies for like 30 people.
Okay.
That ruined my desire to do that for a very long time.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm curious, so if somebody's interested in getting into like defense contracting, and I know
Mhm.
that's a pretty broad space, but
Mhm.
what kind of practical tips or like are there certain skills they should develop? Is there a certain kind of, I mean, probably not major per se or courses, or
Mhm.
how does somebody sort of position themselves if they think they want to go into that industry or that field?
Yeah, I would do some research. So there are a lot of companies to work for. I mean, a whole lot of companies to work for. I mean, it's going to depend on your location a little bit,
And
and
San
your skill
Diego's
set.
pretty big on defense region, right? San Diego's got a lot of,
There's definitely opportunities. Like, yeah, I would just start trying to Google, those companies in your area. And then I say just keep, like, you never know. Do a cold email. If that doesn't work, do another cold email. If that doesn't work, call. Be respectful about it, right? Like, don't give two emails and a call in 1 week. That's ridiculous. But I would say probably over like a 3 month or a 2 month period, having three touch points is totally fair. And they will ask questions, and there's always one of the good things to know is there's always an entry point. There's so like they specifically want so many people who are new to this industry to be in it because that's how you grow and that's how you get like external like ideas and perspectives. And another really big thing that I would say is just work hard. Like
hmm,
if you put in just like a fair amount of effort, like don't do the bare minimum, just like try your hardest. Sometimes it's going to be the awesome. Sometimes it's not going to be as great as anybody else's, but most of the time I've learned that people don't have that grind, they don't have that like perseverance, and they're just going to clock in and clock out. So if you're trying, you're going to move up far quicker than I think that people think that they would.
okay. And so for people that are, very interested in the defense space, but I think a lot of folks, when you think of defense, you just think, oh, I got to go be a soldier or something, right? You're not realizing there's this whole other world of private companies that work with governments and such. But is it advantageous, or is there sort of a benefit if somebody, was in the military for a little bit and then they, try to get into a defense
um
company, or is it just, I mean, I assume it depends on the role to a degree, but
yeah, so right, like if you're in the military, like transitioning to a different facet of the industry that you're already in is always going to be easier.
okay. Yeah.
But I don't recommend that someone join the military for 4 years just to then,
Just
yeah.
right. You didn't have to, and that's a long detour.
Yeah. And I think that some people excel in like defending our country, and I think that's awesome. I would not have been one of those great people on the front lines, but I'm doing my best on this side.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But what about like, I guess, current skills or things that I know that there's new technologies all the time. All job markets are always evolving, but are there any kind of new trends or specific kinds of things that you would recommend somebody be building a skill set around?
So just any like skill in like software or like coding or just knowing how to like do things on the computer that is in like a data science environment, that's always very useful and very like marketable. I'll also say like not on the contracting side, not that you're asking me about my industry, but before I was in this industry, what was very helpful was business. So I interviewed at a couple of different places who would have sent me to business school because they valued those skills. So
Mm.
that would also be a valuable pursuit.
Got it. Yeah, just general kind of, yeah, but business skills make sense. I'm curious about all those. You sent like 100 applications. Did you customize them much, or at that scale were they pretty like standard?
So in the beginning, I didn't. So what I did, which I don't recommend people do, my goal was to send 3 to 5 applications a day.
Oh wow.
That was not a fun time. And so I would customize maybe one a day, or like if there was one that I wanted to customize, like I would customize 1 or 2 a week and then just send kind of blanket ones. And part of it is like that you do need to customize it, but there's another part where it's just so saturated, especially on kind of like if you go on Indeed,
Right.
right?
Monster, Indeed.
Yeah.
What is it,
And there are softwares where you can just like make it so your application gets into literally any job opening, which I
Right.
don't know how to do that, but people
Right.
are doing that and that, yeah.
And that kind of feeds the stats of people saying, "Oh, I sent up, 50, 100, 200, and barely
Mhm.
got a call back." Did you notice that the ones you customized were received, or did you get a higher callback rate, or I don't know if you were tracking that kind of thing?
I did, but not by much. And the ones that I would tailor my resume for were things that I was either like super interested in or was like very much more in my wheelhouse than the random ones. But the billboard job, I did not customize. And I didn't customize for when I had the initial interview with the contract company. But I mean, you also can't, right? Like billboard sales and lotion sales does not translate.
Okay, sure. Have you switched roles a few times? I guess I'm getting at like, promotional opportunities and, some students or some advice, career advice is like, every 6 to 12 months, your first few years, you keep looking for a better job. But then there are those who kind of find a company they really like and then they get a promotion or so do
Mhm.
you have any either in your experience in your pathway or I guess advice on when to leave, when to stay, or how to know if it's the kind of company you want to grow at or
Mhm. Yeah. So my rule of thumb is if you take a job, stay at it for a year. I mean, like there are instances where it's like absolutely terrible and then obviously leave. But if you're gonna take a job, I say do it with the intention of being there for a year. Like I from a loyalty perspective, I feel like if they're willing to give you an opportunity, you need to reciprocate and at least be stable for a year. I also like if I'm looking at a resume and someone has had 6 different jobs in 3 years, that's a red flag.
right.
Right? Like I'm not looking for a
It'll be the
temporary.
next one on there.
Yeah.
Plus,
And
I
then
imagine you want a reference from
yeah.
companies, and if you left after a few months, they may not be too thrilled to give you a positive reference.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, you were about to say something else.
No, I'm gonna be honest. You asked me a really great question that I was really excited to answer, and I'm totally spaced on it.
Oh, just about like, well, I guess there's two parts. One is like if you want to talk about any of your own kind of promotional journey,
Okay.
and then it also just generally if you advice on when students should be sticking it out, trying to
Mhm.
grow with a company versus like hunting the internet for that next promotion outside the company.
Okay. So I'm team like don't like if you're okay with where you're at, like why search, right? So I remember when I was at the billboard company, I knew it was a temporary thing. So I was looking and I remember thinking like the more I was actively looking, the more unhappy I became. And then I just stopped looking for a couple months and I ended up doing a lot better at the job. And I got more opportunities, but I still ultimately left. When I look back at like periods of my life, there have been companies that I've stayed with for, 4 plus years. And there's just a lot of growth. So if you're happy with where you're at, I say just kind of see what happens. I've been put in positions in different companies I worked for, but specifically in this industry. Like if you just do your best, like I have come across opportunities that I didn't know existed,
Mm.
and just out of the blue, it was like, hey, try this.
Are there any like I guess just advice to, that senior in college that's still trying to figure things out? Any tips or learnings that something you wish you knew back then that you know now?
Yeah, I say just apply. Apply to a bunch of things. Apply to things that you know about. Apply to things that you find interesting. Apply to things that you've never heard of. And you're like, sure, I'm gonna give that a try because you never know where life's gonna take you. Like focusing on money matters, right? So when I like one of the reasons I had such a difficult time and I applied to like 100 different places was because a lot of the full-time jobs, we're talking 60, 70, 80% of the full-time jobs that were out there that I saw were paying me less per hour than I was making selling lotion.
Okay.
Wait,
Yeah.
which I was astounded by. I was like, how is this a full-time job and I make more selling lotion? Granted, I was good at it, but that still didn't sit well with me. So money matters, but what you do and who you do it with matter just as much, if not more.
Okay.
Um,
In terms of that, just general day-to-day happiness you feel going to work, you're talking about?
yeah, that and like your like who you spend 40 hours a week with matters.
Yeah.
Like, like you don't want to be miserable. You don't like want to be in an environment where you don't trust like other people, right?
Okay.
See what happens. You never know.
Take the risk and don't be afraid to apply. I like it. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of your insights, and I think there will be some useful learnings for folks who are also interested in the defense space.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.